Ghana may soon join the likes of Argentina, Australia, and Mexico to issue the rare 100-year bonds to finance national projects. President Akufo-Addo announced this at a ceremony in Beijing to sign some 8 Ghana-China cooperation agreements. What does this mean for our economy? So here's Roland Walker having a conversation with Dr. Lord Mensah of the University of Ghana Business School.
We're on the campus of the University of Ghana Business School, and we want to speak to somebody who is not new to the show at all, but helps us in analyzing many financial issues on entrepreneurship, the economy, and things that are relatively bordering trade and commerce, you and I. And who better than Dr. Lord Mensah? Dr. Lord Mensah is a senior lecturer with the finance department of the University of Ghana Business School. He's here. Good morning to you, Dr. Mensah.
Yes, good morning, Roland, and good morning to our viewers.
Yes, and we're here because we want to speak about all intentions with all intents and purposes, whether government of Ghana that is currently floating with the whole idea of having a $50 billion bond over a 100-year period is the way to go and is even acceptable. We'll also be delving into the issues as far as the current negotiations with China are concerned on the $2 billion CBD loan and whether it is a better or just a normal loan that we've contracted with China. But first, let me just pose the question. I was just doing some background reading, and apparently some of the earliest bonds were issued by the Bank of England way back in the mid-17th, and since then we've had the US also issuing it towards the end or the mid-1800s, and this is where we are. Apparently it's not new at all.
No, it's not. I mean, the practice of bond issue started somewhere in the 18th century, you know, where, I mean, we had this industrial development, industrial expansion, all the way from Europe, and then it traced back to America. And it's clear that countries can also borrow as they stand on their own, you know.
Oh, it's quite interesting. We're also not new to bonds, so to speak, because since we had our first one, 2007, we've been on to a number of them so far, and so we're now getting used to it as one of the best liquidity means of improving your economy and the pattern of development. Under what circumstances would you say that such bonds usually are contracted or are issued?
Well, you see, normally bond financing is something that countries looks at. And you will look at it because maybe that is one of the ways to get a long-term financing. And long-term financing, I would say, because if you look at Ghana, most of our investment are in money market, if you look at the investment segregation. So if government should borrow from that market for our infrastructure development, that will match, you know, the possible cash flows that will come from the project to the time of investment that people have put their money as it's supposed to be. But then in the end, if you want to finance such project and you don't have capital investment from in-house, then you have to look elsewhere. And that is why normally we build up onto the international market for bond issue. Now somebody will say, I mean, our debt has been increasing all this while, and especially the external debt. It's not our fault. You know, it's a system where most investment horizons are short-term. So it gives you small space to raise money for long-term projects, and that is why most of the time our government have been looking outside the country to raise money for long term. I think the last time we issued bond, we were able to manage it to 15 years. And 15 years relatively, compared to the earlier bonds we had issued, is quite a long time because the longest time we had was 7 years. And moving to 15 years was a plus because each and every country would like to raise money going forward in a long term so that you can have that flexibility in the payment. Long term does not necessarily mean that you can have lower interest rate. In fact, if you measure risk by time, which means the deeper you go, the more risky it can be in the perspective of the investor. So it means that you have to pay more interest. So it means your coupon payment is going to be on a higher side compared to short-term loans. Now, the question will be, Ghana, relatively, are we ready to issue that 100 years bond? This is a centenary bond. It is a bond for generations. And possibly, Roland, I can tell you that my time and your time, we might not finish paying that bond. And these coupons are going to be annual coupon payment until finally we had to redeem, you know, the principal as it has been. But I've not, you know, I would say that this is more or less an appeal or to test the grounds. Whether the president, I presume, was testing the grounds, whether the Chinese government is prepared to lend to us, you know, relatively long term. But then in reality, I can tell you that our system is not well structured to go for such, you know, bonds. Let's put, you know, our records of how we've accrued debt relative to the infrastructure development in the country. You realize that the debt keeps on swelling, but then the infrastructure that, you know, the debt feeds into development is quite slow. So when you put that across, you ask yourself whether the 50 billion, which is more than the Ghanaian economy within a year, our GDP, will be able to feed directly into infrastructure development. If it happens like that, then it's going to be massive, you know, for us as a country. But I don't think we have the structures to monitor, you know, the debt, how it feeds into our infrastructure development. So for me, I think I would say the president more or less was testing the grounds. He asked for 100 years. If the Chinese are prepared to lend to us for 30 years, it should be able to help us in a way to develop the country infrastructure-wise.
Well, we know that many countries that have long-term bonds, you take some of the more developed countries that have issued them in the UK or England, the United States of America, and more recently we've had even Kenya, we're told, but I've done considerable reading on Argentina. Of course, they have a problem with their economy currently, have to go to bailout with the IMF. They all have certain structural foundations, which enables them to meet such annuities. Now, what should be the fundamentals of our economy, which, coupled with regulation, would enable us to be one of the so-called candidates that could be better prepared?
Yeah. Yes, we need to put systems in place, systems that can track, you know, how we accrue debt, and then also how infrastructure is being developed. Now, the systems I'm talking about is the integration between the various institutions, the finance ministry, and then ministry for, you know, works and housing, ministry for all the ministries that matters in terms of development, how we can integrate them. As we speak now, I presume that until the year is about to end, when you see budget feeding into each other that, you know, aggregate at the finance ministry, the actual integration to look at how the finance ministry has accrued debt and how it fits into infrastructure development like housing, roads, and all those, I think we don't really have it. So we need to systemize, see how we can integrate, you know, activities all the way from, you know, the borrowing level to the point where it can get into our infrastructure and possibly the impact that it will make.
If you listen to the information minister, Akufo-Addo Nkrumah, there's a certain mindset that government has, that it wants to take the economy to a certain pedestal, a certain level. But we have huge trade deficits, and of course we're having this discussion with China, the rest of Africa as well. But they are also part of the problem of the trade deficit we have. We already have competing industry that go down under easily because of certain indicators like the lack of quality, competitiveness, and all that. How can we quickly, or should we quickly shore up so that, and what should we do, knowing that there are tariff regimes or perhaps market regulations that we also need to put in place to make those industries or those sectors also strong then we can bring on board a long-term bond?
Yeah, for me, the long-term bond does not necessarily mean that it should go into businesses or it should. I believe that long-term bonds are normally bonds that comes to place infrastructure that the private sector can leverage on. So I believe that the government going for such a bond, I don't mind if the government should go for such a bond and put it in railways, which, I mean, the private sector can grow his product and then, easily transport it to the port. So this is not a bond that should go into businesses or should finance businesses, but I presume it's going to be, if it goes through, it's going to be a bond that will put infrastructure that private sector can leverage on. Things like telecommunication, things like, we should have majority shares in telecommunication so that it can be cheaper for Ghanaians for easy communication and all those. And roads and maybe very good health facility, because the labor force is very, very important. And then education. Education shouldn't be free SHS. Possibly it should be something concrete, something that targeted education. Exactly. So that in the long term, we can benefit from this.
Now, where can we get the best practice to learn from?
Well, there are several of them. We've been benchmarking our economic indicators with Europe and all those Americas and all those. But then let's start from Africa. If you go to Africa, you come to Africa, South Africa relatively is able to raise money, across the sub-Saharan African countries, relatively long term. So how far are they? I think the longest bond they have issued is about 35 years or so. So presumably, that is where we can start from, and then to learn why they are able to attract bonds in that long term. But as we speak now, the system is not at a level where investor will have confidence to entrust, his funds with us for 100 years.
Now, if the investors would have to entrust, or perhaps will be interested, it would also mean that the rates should be hovering within certain levels. Advisedly, you look at where we are by way of our competitiveness and rating, vis-a-vis what usually the ratings have been for the more industrialized, yes, and all that. And then the type of consolidated annuities and interest that they tend to attract. 4%, 2.5%, 3%. Can we go lower on what even our short-term bonds have been attracting?
I don't think so. We can't go lower, because if I should measure the indicators that would drive the coupons that will come on such a long-term bond, there are several of them. Remember, globally, you are competing. Other countries have issued such bonds, and possibly that will be a benchmark. Okay, if America issues such bonds and they attract, let's say, 3%, I don't think you can attract that, even 5%.
Because you are more of a risk than America.
You are more of a risk than America. So to the extent, the benchmark, the premium that the investor will require beyond what America can give will go up. So in the end, it will also feed into the pricing or the coupons that it's supposed to pay. Apart from that, the interest rate structures within various economies. If you take, for instance, I'm supposed to put my money in this 100 years bond, and it turns up that I can invest in America for 10 years and keep on rolling over, and interest rate will be going up on that side for me, I don't think I would think of, providing that 100 years in Ghana. So presumably, it can't attract, interest payment that is, exactly the same as what we pay on our short-term, relatively short-term, debt that we've been issuing. But then looking, and then also measuring time, using time as risk measure. The deeper you go, the more risky it can be. And the dynamics, for 100 years, we are going to do about 25 elections, and the dynamics in the country when structures change in terms of political, space. You could see it fits directly into the economic management. So the investor would like to manage, look into this risk, the possible exposures that he has. And trust me, this bond won't attract anything like the 19% we issued for the 15-year bond.
Okay. But if we had a national development plan, and then there was a buy-in from the political elite, would that make it easier?
Oh, yes, of course. I mean, governance is about continuity. And if it turns up that, various parties or stakeholders buys into the long-term development plan, that means that the bond that will be issued for the 100 years will feed into, those development. And therefore, no government will come and say, I did not involve myself in this bond, so the usage of the funds that is available, I will not partake in it. Because I presume that China is not going to give us that 50 billion, in total for just one transaction. They're going to register it and then split it over the years. So if it's 100 years, you can accrue maybe 5 billion for every 10 years, and that should be able to find its way into the economy.
Which sections of the economy right now need that sort of push or leverage for which there could be immediate investment, whether we're talking about interest rate payments, or we're talking about infrastructure, or we're talking about regulation and enforcement?
I think we need to look more into the financial sector. The stability is very, very key, because every investor knows that whatever penny, be it pounds or be it dollar that is coming to place in the environment, it has to go through the financial system. So if it turns up that the financial space in terms of regulation has been compromised, then of course it serves as a risk on its own. So then we have compliance issues, and in the end, the investor will panic. So if we want to attract funds into this country, we have to make sure that we have strong regulation, institutions are working, guidelines are not just on paper, they are implemented to the latter.
What are some of the inherent problems or hindrances that tend to negate our effort to be able to achieve compliance, either in regulation, the financial sector, and proper corporate governance or public sector governance?
It's about how we handle those who falter, those guidelines. You see, something has happened in this country. We've had these issues with our banking space, which dominates the financial sector. And as far as I know, until you name, corporate, in such, scandals, you can never solve those problems. You read a lot, so you get to know that most of these scandals, like Madoff and like Enron, and they are named after those who caused it. And it serves as a history and guidelines. In the end, it's a lesson for those who will come after us. But if you keep silent and you don't name anybody, and it turns out that we are just jumbling here and there, you can't solve such problem. We can never put, very good systems in place to ensure that it works for the country.
But the onus lies on us to be able to do the assessment well. It looks like we started mooting this whole idea, or posturing this whole idea, because we went to meet China. China has become integral not only to Ghana, but Africa. How integral is China?
China is infiltrating. They understand the risk, that the European community and then Americans pose to them. If you go to China, most of their export goes to America. In fact, it's a big market for them. But they know very well that regulations and guidelines, you need to adhere to them. And if you don't take care, you might find yourself in problem that at the end of the day, whatever you've invested there, you will lose everything. But they also look at the soft spot. Africa is one of the soft spots when it comes to trade. They know very well that we have all the regulations, but we don't keep trade. And when goods are coming, the checks at the entries, is a soft spot for them. So in the end, they find a way to get the product here without the standards. I can tell you for a fact that products that are going to America, the same standard. My nephew was schooling in China. I visited him, and you could see that the same product, Apple product that is coming to Africa, and the one that is going to America, the standards are different, because they know, to penetrate the market with inferior goods, you'll be in trouble. So I think our entry port across the country, gives them that kind of flexibility. That is why. And
again, is the issue with the regulation?
Yes, of course.
Non-enforcement.
Exactly.
You see that we have laxness or laxity in our system.
Exactly. That is why they find their way here.
With this analysis you've done, it means that we're easily in a position of exploitation.
Oh, yes. I granted an interview yesterday, and I said we are at the receiving end. Remember China extension of this exchange of barter, the bauxite deal. A letter was written to the IMF that China's presence here. They trying to put some injunctions on the whole deal. They've realized that we are at the receiving end, and until we position our economy to a level where, we'll be self-reliant, we'll be, less dependent on things that we don't have control over, and have the competitive edge, I don't think we'll still manage the situation as it's supposed to be. They are going to hit us left and right, and I think this is a soft spot for all those big economies.
The president, in his own statement in front of Xi Jinping, premier for the Chinese Communist Party, said that China was our biggest trading partner in terms of relatively many of the sectors that we have, etc. But at the end of the day, we have a massive trade gap. There's huge deficit. How is that a big problem? In the context of all the things we're talking about, a barter for 2 billion, with our bauxite involved, muting the idea of a $50 billion 100-year loan.
Yeah, I think there is, because the country lacks the capacity to produce. If you look at our production cycles as a country, remember we are a net, importer of goods and services. And in the end, until we start, trying to grow our manufacturing sector, it will be difficult, to bridge the trade gap. And also how we market our product out there, whether the agreement that we've been going into, the other parties are prepared to pick on our product or not. They will tell you, most of these products are inferior. You are using children to produce the goods here and there. So they find a way to cut out your inflows. But they know very well that that agreement is going to benefit them. So in the end, they will start pushing their product into our economy. That is why most of this trade agreement happens. Other than that, there's no advantage for us as a country.
How do we get there?
We are growing.
How do we bridge the trade deficit?
Yes, with the policies that is being enrolled by government upon government, you could see improvement in our manufacturing sector and all those. And then also the quality of education. We are doing well with the policies that is being rolled. A time will come that, the typical European will understand that on the average, the Ghanaian economy, you pick the standard, the minimum education level will be SSS, and they know the quality. That's what India did. And India, to the extent of, people with a bus, people who drive bus, tend to be master's holders and all those. But with quality, and you could see the sense of education in there. So we are on course as a country.
But as we wrap up this whole conversation in many of the areas that we are, if we have to keep depending on aid, it is not untoward, is it?
Well, for me, I believe that we need to be self-dependent, because the aid in itself can break your negotiation power going forward. Because, in the world, I believe that there's no free lunch anywhere. As far as finance moves, it comes with conditions. So if you should rely on aid so much, it's because of some of these aids that when we get, commercial transactions with countries that, they've supported us with aid, we find it difficult to negotiate. So it breaks down our bargaining power. So I believe that if Ghana should work towards a situation where we can be self-dependent, self-reliant, and try to, have a very good bargaining power on our natural resource, we should be fine.
Okay, but now we have to know that we streamline things, knowing that we have a certain agenda to get the aid in, but also know where we have to invest in. Which are the critical areas now we have to quickly, in the short to medium term, investing quickly, stabilize, and then we can think of the medium to long term if we want to invest?
For me, I believe in the foundations of the economy. The foundation being the essential part of it, being education, health, and then the basic roads that we need. Because if you want to start 1D, 1F, and the product is produced somewhere hinterlands, and how to get it to the port for export, it will take so many months. By the time it gets here, it has gotten rotten. I don't think what you want to achieve with 1DF, 1D, 1F will be something sensible economically. But then I believe that if we put those foundations on, like roads, education, and even health, we should be able to, move forward as expected.
And before we go, that argument currently, not only on the $50 billion bond, but also the 2 billion CBD or the 2 billion cyanohydro bauxite butter. Yeah. What really is it? How can we classify it?
Very good question to ask. For me, I go straight to say that if you take it as butter, you see, there are several ways that we could have gotten the 2 billion into the country without necessarily exchanging our bauxite. One of them would have been issuing debt securities, for which it will come with some responsibilities. Now, fortunately for you, we have had that innovation, for which we say, okay, fine. Instead of going to borrow from the international market to get that 2 billion, let's seed our bauxite to our counterparties, and then in the end, we can exchange for the 2 billion now. Now, it's a very good decision because you might never know the price of bauxite in the next moment on the market. So maybe by the time you are prepared to go and, you go and borrow, and by the time you are prepared to export, you might not be able to pay, the debt that you've accrued. So let's have the money now. Now, if you have the money now, as a finance person, I would treat that 2 billion as debt. And being a debt, it will enforce some kind of responsibility. And having a responsibility on that money, I would put the money in areas that it can be self-financing. And then the cash flows that can be generated from those, investment can serve as another line of investment, for which going forward in future, if we are able to determine the price of bauxite in maybe 25 years' time, related to the investment that we've generated, we should be able to determine whether for that decision that we took to have the 2 billion now, we have created value for money, because every decision needs to be backed by economic, ideas and theories. So I believe that I would have treated, this as debt, for which will bring some responsibilities. Other than that, when it comes now, we'll see it as our equity. And being an equity, we can share it anyhow. The projects that these monies will go to, we might not place too much emphasis on it because the monies are not tied to any responsibility. So if you ask me, we should classify it as debt, for which, it will bring some responsibilities on our economic managers. On the other hand, people will say our debt levels are growing. Why are we crying that our debt levels are growing? Because the assets that we place our debt in don't have prospect. They don't have economic prospect. But then going forward, if we classify this 2 billion as debt, and then we isolate it from the normal debt that we've been accruing, put it in an investment, we should be able to match it up with the future price of bauxite for us to determine whether it was value for money decision or not.
Now, if you look at this agreement, we have a responsibility as a country, as a government, to go into those places where we have earmarked bauxite to be, and then go do the mining or the exploration, and then do the processing into alumina, and then subsequently into aluminium. That is, if we want to get the value, the high-end value, we have to get to the metal. Otherwise, if we sell it raw, we're not going to get enough to pay them. That means that the responsibility thereof, even though we're saying that we're exchanging that with bauxite, places a lot of responsibility on our shoulders, which perhaps has not been communicated to the public.
Exactly. People have been crying for the details of the whole agreement, and so far it's at a blind spot of most Ghanaians. And I believe that governance is about transparency, and hopefully the parliament will push for, the agreement to make it public so that Ghanaians will know the details of it. I believe that, for a country to commit its funds, not knowing how much the quantum or the tons of bauxite beneath the ground, I believe that they will also push some responsibilities on us just to minimize the counterparty risk in the agreement.
But is there a future in all this? Going into the markets and saying that we're floating bonds, we want you to come and give us this, and then we want to invest it in our country? Because the Chinese don't care how you invest your money. All they care is that they want to keep your hands tied in a way. I mean, that's what the geopolitics of the whole global trade.
Yeah, I believe that, yes, some responsibilities lies on us as a country. And for me, the future will depend on where we place these funds as it comes in. And then we need to target the economy. We need to prioritize its spending. So that at the end of the day, when we are matching, the value creation to the bauxite that have been extracted from the country, at the same time, the environmental mess that is likely to be caused, we should be able to, be happy as Ghanaians.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a good conversation. Dr. Lord Mensah, he's a senior lecturer with the Finance Department of the University of Ghana Business School, speaking to us about that intended position of government to float a $50 billion bond over a 100-year period. Well, if you look at such consults, it comes with certain annuities, and we're hoping that, well, though that process of the whole amortization will be in a position to pay over the period of a century. It will go beyond the generation of myself and Dr. Lord Mensah, and I'm sure many of you are also watching us. And then we're also transitioning into that whole conversation about 2 billion butter agreement we had with the government of China. But the question has always been, following that memo by the IMF country boss to its head office in Washington, what do we think it is? Is it a butter, or it has to be another debt to our country? Well, we know that you keep the conversation going, but through it all, please get interactive. Facebook JoyNews on TV is a regular page, and then we also have a regular YouTube channel for you to watch My Joy Online TV. As you do all that, please know that you have to stay glued to the channel.